criminal justice system, the American people are represented by several equally important groups. An informed citizenry, including scholars, historians, investigative journalists, and everyday civic-minded Americans who investigate, document, and report crimes committed by the president. U.S. attorneys, state attorneys general, and local district attorneys who prosecute crimes committed by the president, his family, and his associates. The Office of Special Counsel, which investigates and prosecutes crimes in collusion with the Russian government and other crimes committed by the president, his family, and his associates, and reports those crimes to the House of Representatives for impeachment. The House of Representatives, which impeaches or indicts the president for high crimes and misdemeanors, and the Senate, which acts as a jury to convict and remove the president. These are their stories.
Get ready for impeachment.
20 minutes for the hour. Joining us now, former Assistant U.S. Attorney. You've seen him prominently on MSNBC. We're happy to have him when we can. There is this big story over the weekend from the New York Times. Joining us now, as I said, former AUSA. And folks, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're streaming. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Make it plain. Former AUSA Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, good morning to you, man. Happy New Year.
Good morning, Rev. Happy New Year to you.
It's a pleasure to have you, as always. How much is a revelation to you in this report? Did you have any indication that this might have been going on, that the FBI itself, of course, we've all been talking about it for years, the possibility that Trump is a Russian asset, but did you have any idea that the FBI had opened up such a probe?
I think the answer is no, but it doesn't surprise me. I assumed all along that Muellers Probe would have included some of the questions that would also be answered in a counterintelligence investigation. So, on the one hand, it's surprising. On the other hand, given everything we have seen Trump say and do, that makes it clear he is doing Russia's bidding to the detriment of America. It really is not that surprising. But I think there's some good news behind this. And the good news is because there was a counterintelligence investigation opened, I guess, as early as when he fired former FBI Director Jim Comey, that tells me that there were probably all sorts of covert investigative steps undertaken by the FBI to capture in real time some of Trump's shenanigans that will probably end up being integrated into Mueller's investigation. So, Rev, I have a feeling we're probably going to hear lots of recorded phone conversations that they captured that, probably, as we put it, caught Trump talking dirty to the Russians. When we catch somebody on a wire talking about crime with their cohorts, we call it talking dirty. So I suspect we're going to hear a lot more about tapes in the future.
So do we know whether or not this is an ongoing investigation?
We don't know, but given what we see day in and day out coming out of Trump and the White House, that seems to be it seems to align him more closely with Russia than the United States. I can't imagine they would have shut it down. We learned over the weekend that, he apparently confiscated and perhaps destroyed the notes of the translator from his behind closed doors 2-hour session in Helsinki with Putin. That is yet another indication that he was trying to hide what he was talking about. So I don't know how they could have shut the investigation down because there's more to investigate, it seems.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot more there. Why do you think we're just hearing about this now, Glenn? I mean, obviously people are concerned, Democrats are concerned, me included, that Comey was not very circumspect about the investigation of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Why the silence on this for so long, do you think?
Well, the silence makes sense to me, Ref, because you never want to tip off the subject of a counterintelligence investigation. You want to quietly go about your business. You want to give the subject or the target as much opportunity as you can to keep doing what he's doing,
Okay.
so you can collect up information that you can then use to assess what is the threat to the United States as a result of this conduct. The most interesting question is the first one you asked, which is, why is it coming out now? Is it being leaked? I mean, there's no named source that we're attributing this to, so it sure smells like a leak. But why leak this now? We don't know, but it suggests to me that there's a balance to be struck. You keep this under wraps as long as you don't feel like there is going to be this imminent direct threat against the United States. But you know what? Once you think the scale is tipping in favor of all hell breaking loose in the United States because of what the president is doing in coordination with Russia, well, then we've got to act. We've got to move out. So, I am all for giving Mueller all the time he needs to do everything he needs to do to have an airtight case. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves the question, how long do we want a Russian asset sitting in the Oval Office?
Yeah. So, if you were wearing that, Glenn Kirschner with us, folks, quick calls, quarter before the hour. If you were involved in this investigation, kind of summarize for some of the things you would be looking at or some of the steps you would be taking to confirm whether or not he is actually an asset. And I assume by your statements, just from what you've seen from the outside looking in, based on your experience, you believe he is, right, Glenn?
I'll tell you what, I have investigated, indicted, and tried lots of obstruction of justice and conspiracy cases. And so now I'm talking about the criminal side, not the counterintelligence side. But I've tried cases with far less evidence than I've seen reported,
Right.
just in the public reporting here.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that what we see is probably 5% of what Mueller has. So it sure seems to me like he's conspired with Russia. It seems to me that he has obstructed justice to cover up the fact that he has conspired with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
All of that, I'm not a counterintelligence guy. I was a criminal prosecutor for 30 years. But all of that suggests to me that you're doing it either as a witting or an unwitting asset of Russia. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what other explanation there is. Now, maybe it's purely financially driven. Maybe it's because he really wanted to have a big, shiny tower built in Moscow that he could slap his name on. But even so, you're still an asset of sorts, even if your motives are financial, not political. So, it sure seems to me like he is some kind of an asset for Russia.
Well,
What
and
would I be doing? I'll tell you what I would be doing is anything Bob Mueller told me to do, because I worked for him when he was my chief of homicide at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office.
Right.
And back then I did whatever he told me to do. But, he's got a great team assembled. And one of the big questions, and let me just do a quick 30-second breakdown
Please.
on what a counterintelligence investigation is versus what Mueller's doing, which is a more traditional criminal investigation.
Okay.
So let's assume we've got somebody who comes over from Russia on a tourist visa, right? Mm-hmm. And that person starts to take a real interest in one of our nuclear power plants. So maybe the person tours the nuclear power plant, takes pictures of the nuclear power plant, interviews people about the operations of the nuclear power plant, and then packages everything up that he's learned and delivers that information back to Russia. It may be that no crime was committed if somebody did that, but it would certainly pique the interest of the FBI, and they might very well open a counterintelligence investigation to see if that conduct has any sort of implications for national security. Now, let's assume after the guy who's here on a Russian tourist visa does all that, one night he breaks in to the nuclear power plant to get some more inside intel and information about its operations. Well, now that's a criminal investigation because you have a breaking and entering. So, but you can see how those two things are pretty closely related, and they can even become merged because the FBI runs counterintelligence investigations and it runs criminal investigations. And it seems to me that we've got both of those things in play now with Trump. So, we have to wonder how closely aligned has the counterintelligence investigation been with Mueller's more traditional criminal investigation.
Indeed. What from Glenn Kirschner with us, folks? 10 minutes for the hour. What can you tell us about Mueller that may indicate where this is headed, Glenn? You work with him. Um, I've always gotten the impression. I've never worked with him. I don't see him issuing something that doesn't have any teeth or any consequences to it. But I
No.
anticipate him submitting something, and that's if they let us see it. As a matter of fact, if Barr gets in, they may try to seal it up. But and you may be able to tell us what Mueller's strategy is to get around that, because I think he's also been pretty clever in having some things go in the Southern District and other places
Hmm.
that can't be shut down. But what from what you know about him, what can we expect in terms of the thoroughness of his report and whether or not his report is going to have any teeth or consequences?
Yeah, well, in my experience, Bob Mueller is all about following the law,
Mm-hmm.
following the ethical rules of our practice, of the prosecutorial practice, not sort of bending the rules, not going around anything that is set law, procedure, or policy. But when you ask, is his report or the way he decides to provide information about what he's found to the American public, is it going to have any teeth? I think it's going to be nothing but teeth,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because now, I don't know. I don't have inside information, but because I think these presidential crimes, let's call them what they are so dramatic and so detrimental to the United States and so contrary to what we want and need and deserve in a president. I think if Mueller has found evidence of criminal conduct, and my strong sense is there are lots and lots of crimes, he will seek to indict the president. And I think he has
Mm.
the ability to do that, notwithstanding a policy memo that says we don't think it's a good idea to indict a president. The example I've used, Reverend, is, you know, first of all, a DOJ Office of Legal Counsel policy memo doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, right? It's an opinion that,
Right.
we don't think
Right.
it's a good idea. Now, mind you, some might say it's an opinion that tends to protect the head of the agency that issued the opinion, right? Because the president is the head of the Department of Justice. So it's no surprise that the department, and I'm not saying that they did anything wrong or they, put their thumb on the scales, but they said, yeah, our own head, the president can't be indicted. Okay. Let's look at Supreme Court precedent, right? First of all, there's no law that says you can't indict a president. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't indict a president. But let's look at Supreme Court precedent. When Supreme Court precedent is handed down, it's the law of the land, and it's damn near in indelible ink, right? But even Supreme Court precedent gets revisited over time
Right.
based on our evolving societal norms. So if we can revisit Supreme Court precedent, God, for God's sakes, if we couldn't, we'd still be operating under, cases like Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson,
Of
some of
course.
the worst, most horrific cases ever handed down by the Supreme Court. But you know what? We move forward as a society. We progress as a society, and we say, we got that dead wrong, and we need to revisit that. If we can revisit case law that's coming down from the Supreme Court, why in the world can't we revisit an OLC, a DOJ opinion that says it's not a good idea to indict a sitting president based on evolving societal norms, based on what we're dealing with right now, which is a president who seems to have, one, paid off porn stars and Playboy playmates to, rob the American people of the full value of their vote, who has apparently colluded and conspired with a foreign enemy to rob the American people of the full value of their vote. Under these circumstances, it would be foolish not to revisit a memo that says it's not a good idea to indict a president.
Yeah. Very, very good point. Very good point. In fact, Glenn Kirschner with us. Let's do this very, very quickly. Not a lot of time, folks. Quick questions for our guests. Folks up early in California. Sean's out in California. Sean, God bless you. Good morning. Get ready for impeachment. You're on the air with Glenn Kirschner. Go right ahead.
Yes, really. Thank you so much. Just really quick question, Mr. Kirschner. Paul Mann, I understand cooperators can cooperate at any time. Is it possible, in all that's happened last week, Paul Mann, for the inadvertent mistake that his lawyer made, Could that be a way of possibly him being a cooperator but not tipping his scale off to Donald Trump? That's just a thought I had, and I haven't heard it around, and I wanted to get your opinion if that's a possibility. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I was inside government as a federal prosecutor for 30 years, and guess what? I made a lot of mistakes too when it came to forgetting to redact something out of a court filing,
Right.
or not cutting and pasting it right from one document to another. So I actually don't believe that there is some conspiracy behind the Manafort, redaction snafu.
Okay.
I think it
Okay.
was just that.
Okay.
And yes, we learned a couple more things by virtue of the fact that the lawyers didn't adequately redact information out of that document they filed with the court.
Right.
But I think much as if you remember back a few months ago when one of the prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office failed to redact out Julian Assange's name.
Right.
I'm just telling you, we're human.
Yeah,
we're
that happens.
prosecutors, but
That
we're
happens.
human, at least most of us. And, and those are the kind of mistakes we make.
We've got one more question in Cali. David, hang on. We're going to get you a question. We've got to take a break on the radio, though, a hard break. Those you want to hear David's question, join us on our stream, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, Make It Plain, with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, one more question for you. Here's David in California. Glenn, God bless you. Good morning. We'll get ready for impeachment. Go right ahead, David.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Two quick questions, if you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay. The first question is, we all know as average Americans that ignorance is no excuse for violating the law. So my first question is, for prosecutional purpose, what is the difference between a witting or unwitting participant in the case that we're talking about with Donald Trump? What is the difference for prosecutional purpose? The second question is, what happens if all of this is found to be true? He's impeached by the Congress, but the Senate refuses to remove him. What would happen?
Yeah. So two great questions. First of all, every crime has an intent element. So it really depends on what crime you're talking about. So let me give you an example. If you fire a gun at somebody intending to kill them, we as prosecutors actually have to prove that you had the specific intent in your head to kill the person you were firing at. But let's say you were firing at a rabid dog that was charging after the guy who you shot in the direction of. Well, you committed the same act. You fired a gun in the direction of somebody, but you didn't do it intending to kill the person. So even if you hit that person, you winged that person inadvertently, you're not guilty of the crime of attempted murder because you didn't intend to kill. So every crime has an intent element. Now, when it comes to witting and unwitting, that's a counterintelligence term. So that has less to do with a criminal prosecution by Bob Mueller, and it has more to do with what the FBI is investigating about whether Trump was sort of intentionally participating with Russia or just a dumb, innocent dupe who was doing Russia's bidding and he didn't even know about it. So that's the distinction between those two things.
All right.
Now, with respect to what if the House votes to impeach and the Senate doesn't vote to convict and remove, that's a tough question because, and I want to go back to the DOJ memo that says you can't indict a sitting president. That memo says one of the reasons you can't indict a sitting president is because we already have a mechanism to remove a criminal president from the Oval Office, and it's called impeachment. So what if the Senate Republicans are so in the pocket of Trump that they will not vote to convict even if he's committed high crimes and misdemeanors? That is yet another reason that the OLC memo must fall, because the underpinnings of it, that, hey, the Congress and the Senate can take care of it, the underpinnings of it don't exist. But let me just go back and answer the question directly. I think Mueller's going to indict the president, so I don't think the impeachment issue is going to be the biggest question we have to answer. It's going to be more about indicting the president and holding him accountable in a court of law.
David, thank you for your call early out in California. We do appreciate that. I'm afraid we're out of time. Glenn, we're going to get you back soon to talk about a new initiative you started, HFA, Homicide Family Advocates. And we want to commend you for that. Glenn doing the Lord's work, y'all. GlennKirschner.com. If don't wait until he gets back. Read about it now. Go to GlennKirschner.com. It's up on the screen right now, as a matter of fact. And you've heard it here. This is from AUSA folks saying that he expects Mueller to make the case for indictment. So we we'll see. We've been talking about this for a while, and people I admire like Glenn and Malcolm Nance. The New York Times is not as much of a bombshell for me because we've been talking about this. I guess the only thing that's bombshell about it, apparently there are others in the FBI who felt the same way. The question is whether they still do and whether that's still going on. Never before have we seen anything like this with someone in the White House. So we'll continue to watch and also continue to look for Glenn on MSNBC, and he'll be back here as well. Good to talk to you as always, buddy. And again, Happy New Year to you, man, okay?
You too, Rev. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Folks, don't forget, go to GlennKirschner.com. Thanks, Glenn.
All right.
All right, bye-bye. 866-99-SERIOUS. We'll be back live on the radio in just a few.